Have you ever found yourself in a room, looking at the person in charge and wondering, how did this person end up leading anything? It's a strange pattern, right? Sometimes the people who seem the least qualified, the most dishonest, even the most self-absorbed, those are the people who rise to the top. Whether we're talking about a corporate boardroom, a political office, or an institutional hierarchy, this strange truth seems to repeat itself. And that leads us to a big, uncomfortable question. What if the people least suited to lead are the ones most likely to gain power? Today, we're going to explore why our systems, social, political, corporate, seem to reward narcissists, liars, and fools. And we'll look at what one man, Niccolò Machiavelli, figured out over 500 years ago that still applies today. Let's go back to 16th century Florence. Machiavelli, a political thinker and diplomat, wrote a book called The Prince. In it, he made a bold claim. When it comes to leadership, appearance is more important than reality. He wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are." That observation might feel a little cynical, but modern psychology backs it up. In fact, a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that overconfident people are often perceived as more competent, even when they're not. That's right. Not only can overconfidence mask incompetence, it can actually amplify status. So today, we're going to look at why systems of power tend to favor narcissism, dishonesty, and even stupidity, and what we can learn from the rare exceptions who rise with integrity. Let's start with narcissism. You've probably met someone like this, full of confidence, bursting with charisma, always selling a bold vision, but underneath it all, maybe not so solid. And somehow, they keep getting promoted. They keep winning support. They keep rising. Why? Because we're wired to respond to certainty. Imagine this. You're lost in the woods with a group of people. Two people step forward. One says, "I think I might know the way. It's risky, and we'll need to think carefully." The other says, "I know exactly where to go. Follow me." Who does the group follow? Probably the second person, even if they're wrong. This isn't just a thought experiment. It's backed by research. A massive meta-analysis in personnel psychology looked at 54 different studies on narcissism and leadership. It found that the very traits that help narcissists get picked for leadership, confidence, charisma, boldness, don't necessarily lead to good leadership once they're in charge. In fact, companies led by narcissistic CEOs showed 27% more volatility in performance, 33% higher likelihood of negative market reactions to their decisions. One of the most infamous examples of this, Adam Neumann, the former CEO of WeWork. He convinced investors to value his office-sharing startup at a staggering $47 billion, despite mounting losses and a chaotic business model. His confidence and vision were magnetic. But when reality hit, the company's valuation crashed by over 80%. The takeaway? Narcissism can win the spotlight, but it often loses the long game. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago when he said, "Nothing makes a prince so much esteemed as great enterprises and setting a fine example." In other words, appear to be doing great things, and people will believe you're great, regardless of your actual results. This psychological trap explains so much of modern leadership dysfunction, because people often prefer confidence to accuracy. One psychologist put it bluntly, "We prefer confident wrongness over hesitant truth." That's not just a philosophical issue, it's a structural one. But let's pause for a second, because it's not all doom and gloom. There are exceptions, rare leaders who rise without relying on narcissism or manipulation. And these people show us what's possible. Take Seretse Khama, the first president of Botswana. When he took office in 1966, Botswana was one of the poorest countries in the world. But Khama didn't build a personality cult. He didn't centralize power. Instead, he governed with humility and a focus on institutions. The result? Botswana's GDP grew from $69 million to over $8.4 billion by the year 2000. Life expectancy rose significantly. The country became one of Africa's most stable democracies. Khama shows us that while narcissism might help some people grab power, integrity, and steady leadership can create real, lasting success. And this raises an important distinction. The traits that help someone gain power are often not the same traits that help them wield it effectively. So why do we keep getting fooled? Part of the answer is deception. Machiavelli has a pretty infamous reputation for endorsing lying and manipulation. But what he was actually doing was making an observation, not an endorsement. He was saying, this is how things really work, whether we like it or not. Those princes who have done great things have considered keeping their word of little account and have known how to beguile men's minds by shrewdness. Today, we call this strategic messaging or spin. And it works because of something called optimism bias, a tendency humans have to interpret information in the most hopeful way. We want to believe things will work out. We want to trust the people in charge. And so, we often overlook inconvenient truths. This is how skilled leaders and PR teams frame losses as strategic investments and average achievements as historic breakthroughs. They know we're looking through rose-colored glasses. A University of Michigan study showed that when leaders frame difficult circumstances in a positive light, even if the reality is bleak, they can boost employee morale and productivity by 31%. It's not about lying outright. It's about selective framing. Like a magician's trick, the right hand distracts you while the left hand does the real work. Which brings us back to Machiavelli. Let a prince win and maintain his state. The means will always be judged honorable and will be praised by everyone. But is deception the only way? Not necessarily. Look at Patagonia under founder Yvon Chouinard. This company built its reputation not on hype, but on radical honesty. They ran a campaign that literally said, "Don't buy this jacket." They openly discussed the environmental impact of their products. They didn't pretend to be perfect, they admitted their flaws. The result? Revenue grew from $295 million to $1.5 billion. Customer loyalty skyrocketed, 38% above industry norms. So honesty, when paired with consistency and values, can build powerful brands and movements. But the most dangerous form of deception isn't what leaders say to us, it's what they say to themselves. A 2023 study in organizational behavior found that power increases self-deception by 42%. The more power someone gains, the more they start believing their own hype, even when the evidence contradicts it. And here's the twist. When leaders believe their own myths, they become more convincing to others. That creates a feedback loop. More belief, more followers, more power, more self-deception. Machiavelli hinted at this too when he wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Insecure leaders surround themselves with yes men, people who won't challenge their views. But intelligent leaders welcome disagreement. They want to be questioned, challenged, kept sharp. Yet in many systems today, appearing too thoughtful, too cautious, or too self-aware can actually be a disadvantage. This creates what some people call the beer test in politics, the idea that voters prefer leaders who seem relatable, even if they're less qualified. They'd rather have a beer with someone than be lectured by someone smarter than them. This isn't just anecdotal, it's supported by psychology. Researchers call it the pratfall effect. Highly competent people become more likable when they show small flaws. But if they come off as too perfect, too polished, too intellectual, they can seem unapproachable or out of touch. This explains why even very intelligent leaders, like George W. Bush, sometimes lean into folksy communication styles. Despite going to Yale and Harvard, Bush deliberately simplified his speaking style, which helped him connect with voters who might otherwise feel alienated by elitism. The underlying theme here is this: people crave simplicity. They fear complexity. Even if an issue is nuanced, even if the truth is messy, we prefer leaders who act like it's simple. But simplicity has a cost. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2. How our craving for certainty and clarity leads us to select the wrong leaders, and how this dynamic creates long-term problems in organizations, politics, and society as a whole. So let's talk about something most people don't want to admit. We don't always want the truth. We want clarity. In a world filled with complexity, competing narratives, and endless options, clarity feels like a life raft. And unfortunately, the people who offer that kind of simplicity, those who reduce big problems into black and white choices, often become our default leaders, even when they're wrong. This is what makes the illusion of certainty so powerful. We live in a time where the smartest answer to most questions is "it depends." But that doesn't sell, it doesn't inspire, and it definitely doesn't go viral. People don't want nuance, they want direction. And so the loudest, most confident voice in the room often wins. Not the wisest, not the most ethical, just the one that seems sure. This is where Machiavelli's insights hit especially hard. He didn't just warn us about deception, he warned us about the desire to be deceived. Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims. Let that sink in. Machiavelli saw that leadership is as much about managing perception as it is about managing reality. And people, when frightened, overwhelmed, or confused, will accept almost anything that gives them a sense of order, even if it's a lie. Modern psychology backs this up with a concept called the need for cognitive closure. It's the idea that when people are under stress, they seek fast answers, any answers, just to relieve uncertainty. It's a mental shortcut, a way of saying, let's stop thinking and just decide. Authoritarian leaders love this because they can frame themselves as the solution to chaos. They say, only I can fix this. You're either with us or against us. The truth is simple. Don't overthink it. And it works. But what happens next is even more dangerous. Once that kind of leader is in power, they don't just simplify the problem, they simplify the people. You're no longer a citizen, a voter, a thinker. You're part of a tribe, a unit, a tool. You're either loyal or you're the enemy. This kind of binary thinking is what philosopher Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. Not evil committed by monsters, but by ordinary people who stop thinking critically and start following orders. Machiavelli hinted at this long before Arendt did. He knew that once a leader convinces people that the system needs their control, people will often trade freedom for security. We see this today in both politics and business. In politics, leaders consolidate power by manufacturing threats. We're under attack, they say. We must act now. And suddenly, critics are silenced, rules are changed, and institutions are weakened, all in the name of safety. In business, it plays out with cult-like workplace cultures. Employees are told that questioning leadership is disloyal, that working long hours proves commitment, that success requires total alignment. The result? Toxic cultures where fools thrive and truth-tellers are pushed out. Now let's take this deeper. The systems we live in, our political institutions, our corporations, our media, they're supposed to help surface the best ideas and the best leaders. But in many cases, they do the exact opposite. Why? Because of something called perverse incentives. If a system rewards short-term gains, guess what kind of leaders it promotes? People who promise fast results, even if those results are fake, inflated, or unsustainable. If a system rewards loyalty over honesty, who gets promoted? Yes men, loyalists, people who keep quiet when they should speak up. If a system rewards appearances over performance, who rises? The charming, the performative, the narcissistic. We saw this in the 2008 financial crash. Executives were praised for growing portfolios, until it turned out those gains were built on toxic, high-risk assets. They were rewarded for taking massive risks with other people's money. And when it all fell apart, they got bailouts, bonuses, severance packages. That's not failure. That's a system functioning exactly as it was built, to reward short-term wins, no matter the long-term cost. Machiavelli didn't have Wall Street in the 1500s, but he understood incentives. He wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." In other words, the people in power will say what they need to get power. But once they have it, the game changes. The incentives shift. And without accountability, they'll always choose what benefits them most. So what do we do about this? Because let's be honest, pointing out the problem is easy. Solving it? That's harder. The first step is recognizing that intelligence and integrity are not self-promoting traits. Smart people often doubt themselves. Ethical people hesitate to overpromise. Reflective people question their own ideas. And those are exactly the kinds of people who get overlooked in systems built to reward noise and certainty. If we want better leadership, we have to create environments where thinking, real, deep, ethical thinking isn't a liability. It's a strength. Let me give you a real-world example. Angela Merkel. She's not flashy, not charismatic in the traditional sense. No papielis de slogans, no laut teatrix. And yet, she led Germany through a financial crisis, a migrant crisis, a pandemic, all without massive scandal, all with a focus on stability, science, and reasoned debate. How? Because Germany's system rewards coalition building, compromise, and long-term thinking. Merkel didn't rise by shouting the loudest. She rose by navigating complexity better than anyone else. That's a system filtering for competence, not confidence. And we can apply that idea beyond politics, into organizations, workplaces, even our own personal networks. So ask yourself, who do I listen to most? Who do I promote or follow? Am I drawn to confidence or credibility? Because every time we elevate someone just because they seem sure of themselves, we contribute to the very system we complain about. And here's where it gets even more personal. Sometimes we reward fools not because we believe them, but because they give us permission to stop thinking. It's comforting to follow someone who says, "It's not your fault. They're the problem. I have the solution." It relieves us from responsibility, from doubt, from the hard work of thinking critically. But that comfort comes with a cost, because when fools lead, we suffer. The systems decay, the institutions rot, the long-term damage accumulates, and then we wonder how we got here. But it didn't happen all at once. It happened in a million small choices. That's why Machiavelli isn't just useful for analyzing power. He's useful for analyzing ourselves, our fears, our choices, our participation in flawed systems. Because ultimately, the question isn't just why do narcissists and liars rise? The question is, why do we let them? And that's where we'll go in part 3. We're going to look at how group dynamics, confirmation bias, and social pressure all contribute to foolish leadership, and how you can resist those forces in your own life and communities. Let's pick up where we left off. We've talked about how people crave simplicity, how we gravitate toward leaders who sound confident, even when they're wrong, and how flawed systems reward manipulation, not merit. But there's another piece of this puzzle we haven't tackled yet. Us. The followers, the voters, the fans, the teams, the citizens. We're not just victims of bad leadership. We often participate in it. And if we're going to understand how narcissists, liars, and fools keep rising to power, we need to look at the psychology of the crowd. Let's start with something called groupthink. Groupthink is what happens when people inside a group start to value harmony and cohesion more than truth or good decision-making. In other words, no one wants to rock the boat. You've probably seen this in meetings, group chats, even friendships. Someone says something clearly wrong or questionable, and no one speaks up, because it's easier to agree or stay silent than to be the odd one out. Now imagine this on a national scale. A workplace, a political party, a school system. You get this artificial sense of agreement. Not because everyone believes the same thing, but because no one wants to be that person. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, when one of the two must be lacking." When people fear consequences for speaking out, fear of losing status, friendships, jobs, they fall in line. And once the group falls in line, the leader gains even more perceived authority. Even if their leadership is flawed or harmful, no one challenges it. And the silence is mistaken for consensus. This is how bad leadership becomes normalized. And the longer it goes unchallenged, the harder it becomes to break the spell. There's a term in social psychology called pluralistic ignorance. It means that everyone privately disagrees, but assumes everyone else is on board, so they all pretend to agree. It's the silent dinner party, the fake applause, the unspoken rule. And here's where it gets even more dangerous. Bad leaders know this. They use it. They flood the environment with false signals of support, crowds, slogans, praise. So even the skeptics start to doubt themselves. They think, am I the only one who sees this? Maybe I'm overreacting. This is how cults form, how authoritarian regimes build loyalty, how toxic CEOs stay in charge. And it brings us to another tool in the bad leader's playbook: isolation of dissenters. The moment someone speaks out, the group is trained to attack them. You're being negative. You're not a team player. You're just jealous. Now, dissent feels risky, dangerous, even disloyal. So people stay quiet. Machiavelli wrote, "A wise prince ought to attract to himself capable men, and give them the liberty of speaking the truth to him only." Notice that last part, to him only. Even Machiavelli understood that when truth is confined to private whispers, the public narrative stays controlled. Today, we call this gatekeeping, when feedback is allowed behind closed doors but silenced in public. It gives the illusion that everything's fine, while the rot continues underneath. And that's why public dissent, done wisely, ethically, constructively, is so important. Because truth locked away in private has no power to change systems. Now, let's talk about another bias, confirmation bias. This is the human tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe and ignore or attack information that challenges us. It's not a flaw. It's a feature of how the brain processes complexity. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a tool for manipulation. Bad leaders use this to create echo chambers. They repeat the same slogans, the same talking points over and over. And the people who follow them begin to repeat them too, at first casually, then instinctively, then religiously. And here's the twist. The more emotionally satisfying the message, the less likely we are to question it. That's because humans aren't just logical beings, we're narrative-driven. We want stories, heroes, villains, a clear beginning, middle, and end. So when someone tells us, "You're the victim, they're the enemy, follow me to safety," that story hooks us, even if it's built on lies. Machiavelli understood that too. He knew that truth alone isn't enough. It has to be packaged, framed, delivered in a way that resonates. Because the battle for power isn't just a battle of policies or plans. It's a battle of narratives. Which brings us to the final dynamic, status signaling. In every social group, there are cues we use to signal intelligence, alignment, or belonging. Sometimes it's the way we talk, the media we consume, the leaders we follow. In the age of social media, these signals are amplified. You follow the right person, you repost the right clip, you laugh at the right meme, and suddenly you're part of the tribe. But what happens when those signals are tied to a deeply flawed leader? Now, your identity is tangled up with someone who lies, manipulates, or fails. And admitting they're wrong feels like admitting you're wrong. That's the emotional trap. We stop evaluating leaders based on outcomes and start defending them based on affiliation. You see this in political parties, in fandoms, even in workplaces. And it leads to something called motivated reasoning, where we twist facts to fit our beliefs instead of adjusting our beliefs to fit the facts. And that's how entire institutions can rally around leaders who are clearly failing. Not because people are dumb, but because they're invested. So what's the answer? How do we stop rewarding bad leadership, both systemically and personally? It starts with a mindset shift. We have to stop equating confidence with competence. Stop confusing charisma with character. And stop valuing certainty more than humility. We need to normalize leaders who say, "I don't know," who invite criticism, who resist spin, who change their minds when new evidence emerges. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And we need to take that same principle into our personal lives. Because whether you're a manager, a creator, a parent, or just someone trying to navigate the world, you are a leader in your own right. And the most powerful thing you can do is model the kind of leadership you want to see. That means asking hard questions, even when it's uncomfortable, encouraging dissent, not punishing it, admitting when you're wrong, and correcting course, prioritizing long-term truth over short-term approval. These are small acts, quiet acts, but they create ripples. They build cultures where narcissists, liars, and fools don't rise because the soil doesn't allow it. And that brings us to our final point, the rare leaders who actually get it right. In Part 4, we'll explore real-world examples of ethical, wise leadership that broke through the noise. We'll talk about how smart systems protect against manipulation, and how we can design our communities, organizations, and even our minds to favor truth over deception. Because while Machiavelli showed us how power can be misused, he also gave us the blueprint to resist it. Let's bring this full circle. We've explored why systems of power often reward narcissists, liars, and fools. We've unpacked the psychology of how confidence beats competence, how groupthink silences dissent, and how we often prefer stories to truth. But here's the good news. This cycle isn't inevitable. There are people, organizations, and entire cultures that break the pattern. They prove it's possible to lead with humility, intelligence, and integrity, and still win. So let's look at what real leadership looks like when it's done right. Take Jacinda Ardern, former Prime Minister of New Zealand. When tragedy struck, whether it was the Christchurch mosque shootings or the early days of the pandemic, she didn't respond with macho posturing or finger-pointing. She responded with compassion, clarity, and facts. She said, "We will be a nation of kindness. Stay calm, stay informed, be kind," and people listened. Under her leadership, trust in government surged. The country's COVID response was among the most successful early on, and even people who disagreed with her policies often respected her approach. Why'd it work? Because she led with transparency, emotional intelligence, and competence, the very traits most systems usually overlook. Now let's zoom out to systems themselves. The Nordic countries Sweden, Norway, Finland are consistently ranked among the best governed nations in the world. Their leaders are often quiet, consensus-driven, and policy-focused. Not flashy, not theatrical. What's their secret? Institutional design. These countries have proportional representation, so more voices are heard in parliament. Publicly funded media to reduce misinformation and polarization. High levels of civic education, so people understand how government actually works. In other words, they've built systems that make it easier for good leaders to rise and harder for bad ones to manipulate the game. It's not perfect. No system is. But it proves that structure matters, that you can design for integrity. And this design principle can be applied at all levels. In your company, your school, your friend group, even in your own brain. Let's talk about that for a second, because personal leadership matters too. Every day, you and I are faced with choices. Do we follow the loudest voice or the wisest one? Do we repost the hottest take or sit with the uncomfortable truth? Do we reward charm or character? And most importantly, do we play the short game or the long game? Because leadership built on spin, ego, and tribalism can win fast, but it crashes hard. Leadership built on trust, thoughtfulness, and service, it builds slow, but it lasts. So let me offer you some practical filters for spotting and supporting real leadership, wherever you are. YW checkmark filter 1. How do they respond to criticism? Do they listen carefully and adjust? Or do they attack the critic? Real leaders invite feedback. Bad leaders silence it. YW checkmark filter 2. Do they have a plan? Or just a villain? Watch how often someone talks about what they're against versus what they're for. If their entire pitch is fear and outrage, be cautious, because fear is a short-term fuel. Vision is long-term power. YW checkmark filter 3. Are they consistent over time? Anyone can be charismatic for 30 minutes. But real leadership is measured across years. Pay attention to how someone acts when no one's watching. When the spotlight is off. When the polls dip. That's where the truth lives. YW checkmark filter 4. Do they build others up or just build themselves? Watch who gets credit. Do they share the spotlight or soak it all in? True leaders create more leaders. False ones create dependence. Now, let's flip the lens inward. How do you lead? Whether you run a team, post on social media, vote, or raise kids, your actions shape the culture around you. And the more you model truth, nuance, and accountability, the more you change what gets normalized. You don't have to be a president to lead. Sometimes leadership is admitting you were wrong, so others feel safe doing the same. Asking hard questions in a meeting, so the next person knows it's allowed. Choosing not to repost a viral clip because you checked and it wasn't true. These may feel small, but they're not. They're acts of resistance. Quiet ones, thoughtful ones. The kind Machiavelli himself might have underestimated. Because if there's one thing Machiavelli got wrong, it's this. It is better to be feared than loved. But history has shown us time and again, the most powerful kind of leadership is built not on fear or deception, but on trust. It just takes longer, and that's why so few pursue it. But here's the thing. Right now, at this exact moment, we live in a time of institutional mistrust, of social unrest, of polarization, manipulation, and nonstop noise. And in that kind of world, authentic leadership becomes radical. So if you've ever felt like you don't belong in leadership because you're not loud enough, aggressive enough, or ego-driven enough, this is your moment. Because we need people like you. We need the skeptical, the thoughtful, the quiet, the emotionally aware, the ones who read, question, and listen more than they speak. We need systems and cultures that lift those people up, not push them aside. And it starts with awareness. Because once you understand how power can be hijacked by narcissists, liars, and fools, you can start building antibodies. In yourself, in your teams, in your community. It's not about being perfect or knowing everything. It's about staying open, staying grounded, staying real. And that's how we win the long game. Not with theatrics, not with spin, but with clarity, with courage, with consistency. So let's close with this. Machiavelli wasn't wrong when he said that deception works. That fear motivates. That charisma can outshine competence. But what he didn't fully account for, what maybe he couldn't see from his world of courts and princes, is the power of shared truth. Because when enough people commit to clarity, when enough people value thinking over reacting, when enough people stop rewarding bad leadership, the game changes. And suddenly, the liars and narcissists don't rise. Because the crowd doesn't cheer.